Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Worm, a Daily Planet Films podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss the hit web serial Worm week by week, arc by arc. My name is Matt Freeman, your host and nefarious bomb-dropping government agent, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and giant mutated beetle that I fly around on, Scott Daly. Scott, how are you doing this week?
I am doing really good, Matt. And as you said, this is the podcast where you, a disturbingly unhinged worm expert, guide me, a first-time reader, through the war, death, explosions, and horribly mutated bugs and people as I inspect, interpret, and even speculate on what the story is and where it is going. This week, Matt, we are tackling part 1 of arc 14, Prey. I got ahead of myself. We're not there yet. Prey, this covers chapters 14.1 through 14.7. This was a really long arc, so we had to break it in two. This is the first part. It feels like we're really headed, Matt, with this arc into the climax of this whole Slaughterhouse 9 story. Things are ramping up towards that third act moment, and there's a lot of action here and a lot of theme realization coming to play in this arc. And so I'm really ready for this. I was really ramped up. I'm kind of bummed I had to stop reading on chapter 7. Yeah. But, this is a good one.
Yeah, things are getting really intense and exciting and fun here. I did want to say that we were planning on stopping at 14.6, and at Wildbow's urging, actually, we read through 14.7 because I think his sense was that was a more organic break for the story. And I agree. I thought that the place where we ended was a really satisfying place to end, actually, even though it was the middle of an arc. So did you agree with that?
I did generally. I think the thing that I ended up liking about where 14.6 left us is it felt like the end of the Amy storyline. And I'm not saying she's totally done, but she makes this big choice in 14.6 and leaves the rest of our group, and then they move on and start dealing with the other problems they had. So that felt like an end to that. But everything else in the arc ends better on 14.7. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. So, Scott, why don't we move into discussing the comments and questions?
Let's do it.
So, first of all, Wildbow dropped by and gave us some feedback. One thing that he says is, I know you guys didn't have as much time to tackle this last arc because we had some scheduling difficulties. And less days of prep time, and it was a longer arc. So were there any thoughts on the effects of the more condensed / faster read coupled with the intensity of what's going on? I definitely have some thoughts on that, but Scott, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely more stressful. I basically sat down on the Sunday before we recorded and read at a coffee house all day. Like, I just sat down all day at a coffee house and read through it once and then read slowly through it. I didn't get all the way through it that day, but it was definitely, the condensed schedule definitely stressed me out more, especially since 13 was a longer arc. The recording time stressed me out more because I knew we were trying to fit a lot in one session. I'm much less stressed about that today because we have so much less to cover in probably, let's be honest, the same amount of time we always take. But yeah, I mean, I think I like the more time. I mean, I think we were able to do it. It was ironic that I felt more prepared about our Arc 13 discussion than I did about the one we did on that Friday that we had so much more time to prep for. I don't know why. I think maybe it was fresher on my mind, or maybe I'm not sure why that was.
Yeah, I think it might have just been that, like, we knew we had to be prepared for it because we had to fit in so much. Like, for my part, I had to be a lot more aggressive with paring down the beats that I was going to summarize to the ones that I really wanted to make sure that I covered, and that meant that, like, some of the fight scenes I had to basically just be like, and then there was an awesome fight scene here. Whereas in other arcs I might have, like, gone into the back and forth of the battle more, and I think that's fine. I think that there is such a thing as going too far in the direction of condensing things, but I was actually very happy with the level to which we condensed last week's. But that's probably about the limit of how much I want to condense things, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I think there were probably, if I'm being entirely honest, there were probably a few things that we could have gone in more detail on that we just weren't able to. So that was definitely the upper limit of what I want to try to fit in these shows, because I mean the detail I think is important. It's essential to what we do to really dive into this stuff and parse through it. But it's so long at times that it's hard to do that and still create listenable content.
Yeah. I mean that's a very interesting balancing act in a project like this. Is how much is it appropriate to skip between the important beats, and how much is it important to delve into really minor things? Because I mean, frankly, Wildbow's writing is so intentional that really small things can actually matter a lot, and so you can delve in on a really high level of detail if that's what you want to do. So. And
I mean, there's things that we don't talk about that get brought up in comments and emails and stuff, and I wouldn't necessarily say that a lot of people say, I think you missed XYZ. And sometimes, yeah, we just missed it. But sometimes it didn't rise to the level of importance in our minds that we needed to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And sometimes I don't pick things out to talk about because I don't want to prematurely draw Scott's attention to certain things.
Yeah.
It's another fact.
Because my brain works that way, where even if I do it subconsciously, I'll say, Matt brought this up. I wonder if this is going to matter.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like several arcs ago, I very intentionally wasn't like, interesting, Coil's talking about buying his power. What is that?
Right, yeah, that one was definitely picked up. And like, Scott, I can't believe you didn't notice this. And it was just like, I wasn't thinking along those lines. I mean, in retrospect, it's like, yeah, of course that's what he was talking about. But your brain's just not there at that time because you don't even really think that's a thing that exists in the world. But
right.
Yeah, no, but I think we kind of went off track there a little. But to wrap the whole thing up, yes, I think it was more stressful, but I think probably like Wildbow does, we kind of operate better under that stressful situation. So I think it worked out. I hope it did. I thought last week was a really good episode, but
yeah. So now that we're off track, Scott, why don't we talk about some other things that we saw in the comments this last week?
Yeah. I don't think we have any specific questions we're going to address because we got a lot of comments about the fact our talk about executing Shatterbird. We got a lot of comments about people thinking we were being a little unfair to Taylor, and I made a lot of snarky jokes about that. But I really wanted you and I to dive into that and talk about how defend our position, I guess. So you take it away, and I'll join in as needed. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start out, Scott, by paraphrasing something that you said in a conversation that we had about this, which is basically just sort of an explicit statement of the approach that we're taking here, which I think justifies kind of the tack that we're taking toward Taylor as a character, which is just to say that this is a story. In a story, you have a protagonist, and the protagonist undergoes an arc of growth and change based on their wants and needs, and through the conflict created by the antagonist, they grow and change. In good stories, this growth and this arc are tied to what is called the theme of the story, which is the main idea of the work. And when you're looking at Taylor's character through this lens, saying that you're being too hard on her is really a category error. It's like it's impossible to either be too hard or too soft on the character. You're judging the character by the standards of what you think the theme of the work is, and what you think the character's arc is, and so we're not criticizing her on the grounds of being like good or bad. We're criticizing her only in the sense that the story is asking us to examine her choices through a certain lens, and I think it's very explicitly doing so. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. There's so much talking about Taylor's trauma and how that trauma leads to this kind of defense mechanism of categorizing people, and how that leads to actions and justifications of actions that we probably wouldn't necessarily be okay with. And an escalation in those justifications, I think, is one of the most important things. That if we look at Taylor from the beginning of the story and the actions that she was justifying then, putting spiders on people at a mall and threatening to bite them. We've moved so far beyond that now, and as you said, that's very intentional. Like we're exploring morality and grayness in morality through a character that her central conflict is fighting with her own understanding of what being good and what being bad is. And like, if you're doing that, if you're exploring that, you have to talk about when she makes decisions that seem counter to the type of person she wants to be, and seem to be leading her down a path of justifying more and more badness to get what she wants or to get what she needs. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, especially when she comes back later, and this character herself identifies those choices as having been regrettable.
Right, and that's what we're going to see in this arc. There's a lot of self-realization in Taylor going on in arc 14, and she has this way of being able to notice things about herself when she's seeing it in other people. She sees a lot of herself in Amy, and kind of has moments of realization related to things that she's done in that, and we'll get into all that this week. But I mean, that's kind of, for me, when I read stuff like that, that's confirmation of the angle that we've interpreted this work as. And like, I don't, death of the author and all that, everyone can get what they want to get out of something, but our intent here is to analyze it, to analyze the narrative. And this to me is absolutely what the narrative is presenting to us.
Yeah. And to everything you just said about defending Taylor as a character, I think the desire to defend Taylor comes from a very healthy and understandable place. And I even feel the temptation to do it when I see other people being what I think of as unfair toward her, because that's really just the basic impulse, the human impulse to stand up for somebody that you care about. But I think that it's actually misplaced here, because we're doing critical analysis of a narrative and of a character. And in fact, what we need to be doing is suppressing, or at least examining, our impulse to defend and justify the actions of these characters, particularly because the challenge here is that we have a character who's very good at justifying herself. So we're being challenged by this story to keep a firm critical eye on things. And the only way to not fail in this challenge is to apply this strict scrutiny to what we're seeing in the story. Because, like we said, Taylor herself tells us that she regrets a lot of her choices. So if we just give her carte blanche in terms of her justifications, then we're not engaging with the text properly, I think.
Yeah, and I think that is really the crux of this whole thing. That right there is that when I see people tell me that I'm being mean to Taylor, I'm being unfair to Taylor, it usually comes with like a paragraph of them justifying every single one of her actions one by one, and like grabbing at anything they can in the story to say why this was the correct decision. And I think you can find that if you look for it, because you see Taylor doing it. And that's what I want to tell people most of all, is that when you say that stuff like that, you remind me of Taylor. You remind me of her ability to take an action and find a way to make it okay, because it suits what she needs and she wants. And I think the story's doing that on purpose, and I think that's actually a testament to the writing of the novel, that you do that, because you're so far in her head that's a tendency to do that. I'm certainly not like, I don't think we've ever just sat down and like picked at every single thing she's done and said, no, don't do this, I would have done this. I think we've always tried to take it from that high narrative level, that thematic level of what is the story telling us? What is the story showing us through Taylor's change so far? And I mean, I got, like I say it over, I love Taylor. I think she's one of the most fascinating characters ever. But you know, I really like Walter White too, and I would never defend some of Walter White's actions. And not to say that they're exactly the same type of character, but they are going on a similar journey where they're flirting with the dark side of certain behaviors. And I mean, I think that's what the story's doing.
Yeah. And speaking of Walter White and bald fictional characters, I wanted to bring in
perfect. That's perfect.
I wanted to bring in my favorite acronym, which I think is a good touchstone for this conversation. Maybe we can hit upon this over the course of the day, but the acronym would be WWJLPD, which is, of course, what would Jean-Luc Picard do? So Jean-Luc Picard, if you're familiar with Star Trek: The Next Generation, is sort of a moral paragon. Like, that's the point of his character, is that he's kind of morally unimpugnable. Like, he has character flaws, but none of his character flaws really center around having any kind of moral flaw. Like, he is just the moral ideal almost of like the evolved humanistic sensibility. And I like to imagine, like, okay, would Jean-Luc Picard condone mind enslaving someone even if they were really bad? Would Jean-Luc Picard condone executing a prisoner extrajudicially? No, obviously. Like,
Right. Yeah.
Like obviously, like you can imagine how his character would respond to these things. So I find that to be a useful touchstone, because not because I'm saying Taylor should be Jean-Luc Picard. What I'm saying is, when you find yourself having an urge to justify a character's actions, if you ask WWJLPD, you will see that Jean-Luc would not justify this. and then that is your standard of, oh, I get it now. Like, it's a reflection that forces you to say, oh yeah, I'm doing a justifying thing. And
Yeah.
Just like the character is.
Yeah, I really love this because you're absolutely right, and you've got Jean-Luc Picard pretty pegged. And since you told me this, like, I'm doing it with everything that I read and see now, and it really does help, because I can't think of a better paragon of like moral understanding in any kind of literature or narrative I've seen. That's one of his strongest character traits, and it's the reason why people like him and the Next Generation so much, is because of that. Jean-Luc Picard would look at the trolley problem and say, "This is unacceptable. We have to do something. I refuse to play in a game in which these are my options." And that's not always possible. Like, I understand that there are complications and nuances in life and in this worm world where you literally have to choose between two terrible choices. But the question I always ask myself in that moment is, would Jean-Luc Picard have let himself get in a situation in which those were the only two choices in the first place?
Right.
And probably not. So I think that's great. I really like that a lot. Yeah.
I have a feeling that people are going to point out to us that where this does and does not apply. But again, I just want to mention this. The idea here is to say, would Jean-Luc Picard try to self-justify like this? And the answer is always no. So
yeah, and we're very clearly talking about the show Jean-Luc Picard, because the movies, that character kind of changed a little bit.
He's just an action hero in the movies. Yeah. We're not talking about the movies. Ignore the movies.
He goes nutso in First Contact. Good movie. Not Captain Picard.
No, all right. I think that took some time, but it was important for us to lay out our philosophy and our approach here, because otherwise, I don't want people to hear us doing what we're doing and interpret that as us ragging on a character unfairly, because that's categorically different from what we're trying to do here.
And if I ever catch myself doing that, I will absolutely fall on the sword and say that, yeah, that's my bad. We're being too critical. But I think the things that we've said, the important moments of Taylor's moral shakiness have all been like confirmed by the story itself as being important moments of moral grayness. So that to me just reinforces that what we're doing is following what the story wants us to do.
Yeah.
So yeah,
or at the very least, is valid.
Yeah. So that's that. Let's talk about this arc 14. Let's do it.
Yeah. Alrighty. So 14:1 opens up. Taylor wakes up, having fallen asleep on Brian's shoulder, basically, and he hasn't slept at all. There are some definite contrasts here between her behavior here and her attitude the previous night. And basically, a lot more compassion on her part. And Brian is clearly extremely on edge and twitchy.
Yeah, I'm really glad you pointed out that specific change in her attitude. And I think I thought about this a lot because obviously there were a bunch of people that said we were being unfair to Taylor in how she handled that situation. But I think that change is very distinct and intentional here because, like you said last week, when Brian confronted her, she was triggered. One of the first things she did was think of Emma, and Emma jumped in her mind, and because basically it was her best friend confronting her and quote unquote betraying her, and Taylor went into fight or flight mode, and she stopped really thinking she either was going to defend herself or she was going to get away, and that's kind of what she did, and she became the survivalist Taylor, and then. So he kept her there because she kind of manipulated an apology out of him, probably unintentionally. I don't think she was aware that she was doing that, but that's kind of what happened. And now she wakes up the next morning and she doesn't see Brian as her bully. She doesn't see Brian as Emma, but she sees him as friend, compatriot, innocent person on my side. And then she reacts accordingly, and suddenly we see the Taylor that we see a lot of times, which is a really compassionate, caring person who wants to help but doesn't always know how to.
Yeah. I mean, this just shows us that triggered Taylor is very different from untriggered Taylor, and she's someone we like and someone who's heroic when she's being her best self, but she definitely falls pretty far when she feels pushed.
Yep.
And we've seen that over and over again, and it, we could go on at great length about the things that trigger her and why exactly that has driven her character in the kind of the more destructive directions, actually. But so let's move on. Aisha and Alec have returned to the lair. Aisha gives Taylor a hard time, accusing her of using Brian's vulnerability to get closer to him.
Yeah, and like Wildbow does in so many different ways, he takes these tiny little character beat moments and uses them in multiple ways to tell us quick things about the characters. We haven't really ever seen Aisha and how she feels about her brother. She's mostly really sarcastic and whiny. And in that one chapter where we were in her head, we got a little into it, but we hadn't seen does Aisha does she like Brian? And I think this moment serves to confirm that as much as she's a brat, she really does care about her older brother, and she's very defensive of him, and she perceives this Taylor as a threat, or maybe manipulating him or something. And so it enforces that, and then it shows once again kind of Taylor's disconnect between her own perception and others' perception of her. The fact that Aisha sees Taylor as the person that would manipulate events in order just to get closer to Brian is very telling. We know that Taylor was not consciously doing this. I don't think in any of that moment in chapter 1310, Taylor says anything about getting Brian to like her until he brings it up himself. So we know that wasn't going through her head. But it does say something about her that Aisha can look at this character and come to that conclusion on her own.
Yeah, I think this is a great little moment. It says a lot about Aisha, and it does say a lot about Taylor by reflection. I agree. So Alec also mentions that Brian probably didn't mind it in his normal sardonic way, and he elaborates his opinion that cuddling up with another warm body is a very pleasant experience, which, of course, in the course of doing so, he reminds us that not all the bodies that he cuddled up with in the past were necessarily willing. And I think it's very intentional here that we're being reminded of this aspect of Alec's power here as we set up this arc.
Yeah, it's this chapter 1 setup, and it's done in such an organic way that, if you're paying attention, you can see it like we did, but you might just think it's a good character moment. Because, what we're doing here is saying we need to remember who Alec is, because while there's a lot of people like him, and I understand why people like him, but he is kind of a monster. It doesn't matter what his motivations or the reasons behind it is, but he does bad things. And it's just a great, really natural way of bringing that up and kind of showing how much the line of what's acceptable to our group has moved now. Because at first, Taylor was having to really push to morally justify taking control of Sophia. The Undersiders have now just decided that Alec can use his power, and there's really no discussion about it anymore. So we've moved the line a little bit. And
Yeah.
I like that that's brought up because it's going to come into play big time near the end of, fortunately, this section. Fortunately, we don't have to cliffhanger this till next week. But
yeah, but we'll see Taylor defend the use of the body sealing to someone else, which definitely highlights the slippage of the moral line there.
Yep.
So yeah, this image here, I adore this image of Taylor serving the travelers breakfast, and then Ballistic taking over the stove. It's just this lovely domestic scene of these villains hanging out and making food together.
Yeah, I like it too. And again, it shows how every moment in a story can give you something. Because in this moment, we have this little Rachel conversation where she says, you can give the dog some bacon, and Rachel reacts just like you think she would, which is like, no, I'm not going to give my dogs human food. That's bad for them. Taylor apologizes, and then Rachel follows it up with, but I'll have some, which is a change. And that's not the way a normal Rachel conversation with Taylor would end, at least not recently. And it's a tiny little setup that pays off like almost immediately after their conversation in the chapter. But I think that's like a flag that like they're maybe reaching a point where they can reach some sort of catharsis. And I think that sets that up. But I also think you're absolutely right that Ballistic taking over the stove says something about his team, and it's like all this stuff is saying stuff, and it's happening just so organically that you don't even realize you're being set up for stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Taylor asks Rachel about Bastard, the new puppy, which leads to a conversation about Siberian, because Siberian gave her the puppy, and Tattletale first puts forth that Siberian is actually an actor in some sense, and that the feral angle that she was putting forth to Rachel is fake. And Tattletale has also figured out, after seeing Gru's monochrome man, that Siberian might be a projection, and that there might be a real vulnerable body somewhere. And I just wanted to have an aside that it kind of goes without saying at this point in the story, but if it weren't for the Tattletale factor, it would actually be pretty lame and annoying that our plucky young heroes have managed to figure out that Siberian is a projection after years of the whole protectorate failing to grasp this fact. But actually, like, we've grown to accept that this is just Tattletale's thing, and it's neither surprising nor like breaking you out of the story that she's the one to figure this out.
Yeah.
And I like that. This is one of the many times that the Tattletale element is used well.
Yeah, she's a very effective tool for getting information to our characters in a way that makes us say, are they just learning this because they're the protagonists? And that's just, yeah, I agree. I'm curious if you realized on your first read through that black and white swirly Brian was Siberian. In retrospect, it was like being black and white and having like swirls and being impenetrable and super strong was like a hint, but it just never occurred to me. Like my head hadn't gone there with what Siberian was.
So I think what happened with me was I was largely just confused because I think I recognized it as Siberian's power, but I didn't at all make the connection of like, but Brian is still chained to the wall. Like, I think if anything, my brain was like, did he turn into that and then turn back into his self that was chained to the wall or something? Like, even though there's no like text to support that. So I did not. I think I did grasp that it was Siberian's power, but I didn't go to the point of being like, oh, Siberian's a projection.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting because like, obviously I didn't like try to point it out or whatever last week, but it's one of those places where I suspect there's a wide range of reactions to that scene.
Yeah. Yeah. Other than that, I did really like Rachel's reaction to this whole conversation, because she feels lied to and betrayed. Because like as much as she didn't trust Siberian, and I really think she would never have gone with her, there was this moment where she felt understood and she felt like she could relax and be herself around a person, that a person got her. And I think she just like gets let down again. And I'm not 100% convinced. Like, I think obviously we learned Siberian is a projection and it's an old dude. I don't think she was fully bullshitting Rachel when she was talking to her. And I think Siberian and whoever is controlling her believes those things to a certain extent, but it was definitely acting. It was definitely, at least to Rachel, putting on a show for her, and that just like puts her in a vulnerable position. And I think that kind of like leads to the conversation we're about to have. It leads to Rachel to a point where she reaches out to Taylor in some way because she's feeling betrayed by another human, and so she finally decides to take a shot on her friend again.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. The last arc was definitely setting up the context through which they could reestablish some kind of trusting friendship, and this is an important step, I think, in that. So here we have another Taylor trying to be Rachel's friend while Rachel sort of blows her off while probably secretly appreciating it moment. Or at least that's how I always see these moments. Yeah,
and it's a really great conversation. I loved it so much. We don't have time to go through every piece of nuance of it, but like you can kind of see Taylor like wear down Rachel's defenses. Just Rachel's reaction is to go, those are just words. But then she keeps seeing Taylor like back up her words when it comes to her. And like it's at a point where like that Rachel is so desperate to trust Taylor again. Like she really wants to. She really wants to be able to, but she's not sure if she can. And like I think we're finally getting to a place where she feels comfortable she can. And this worries me. It's like I really hope Taylor doesn't screw this poor girl over again. Like I think like I worry that this falling out with Coyle that's going to happen in the future, like it's just going to happen. It's very clear that that's going to happen, that Rachel could be manipulated or perceive it as betrayal. And I think that will be the last straw for that friendship. I think it's got a place where it can be good going forward, but that could damage it. And I'm worried about that because I care about Rachel so much. She's such like underneath it all, she's such a decent person who just wants connection. And it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah, I think that's kind of masterful how this character is actually like introduced in a very unlikable way and consistently behaves in a very unlikable way. But after peeking into her head and understanding her character, it makes her very sympathetic. I love this aspect of the story.
Yeah, and I see her as a puppy dog now, and I think that's intentional. That like you start to see her that way, and you pity her to a certain extent. And I want this friendship for her, not just so my prediction was correct, but because I want this for the character.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like an important part of her development. So they contact Cherish on the phone to ask for clarification on the Siberian issue because they figure Cherish would know if Siberian was a projection because her power would allow her to basically see what was going on. And Cherish simply demands 2 minutes to address everyone in exchange for this information.
Yeah, that's not at all a creepy request.
Yeah. So they conclude that she's probably planning to sow division between them. So they get a book and they say, okay, we're going to pass the book around. Everyone's going to close their eyes. And if you have a horrible, terrible secret that no one else can know, then rip out a page toward the back of the book. And if you wouldn't really mind the dirt being dished out on you in front of everyone, then rip out a lower page number. And everyone does this, and there's in the end wadded up in the pile of book pages. There's a 222 who Alec immediately admits to being, which is hilarious.
I love that.
And a 325. So here, Lisa basically says, just going by what I know about our groups, I think our team is going to be more concerned about what outsiders think. You guys are going to be more concerned about what your teammates think. Am I wrong? So she uses this to justify basically kicking the travelers out and having the Undersiders just stick around and listen to Cherish's address.
Yeah, and it's such a perfect and simple way to compare how these two teams operate and function, right? It makes sense why the Undersiders seem to function better as a unit than the Travelers, because the Travelers keep secrets from each other. The Undersiders circle their wagons, and generally everyone in them knows secrets, and they just want to keep them from other people. Really makes you wonder what that 325 is, though.
Yeah.
My guess is that it's Trickster knowing something about what happened in Noel that he's not comfortable sharing with the rest of the group, but I don't know.
Yeah, I love this just like as a story element of being like, okay, we don't know what it is, we don't know who it is, but we know that someone has a terrible secret now.
Right.
So that's fantastic. So yeah, the travelers leave, and the Undersiders call Cherish. And Cherish starts going in on all the characters, and she's sort of trying to do what we've seen Tattletale do a bunch of times, where she just goes at people on their weak points, but she does it kind of differently, and it's, I think, less effective in general. So like she starts in on Alec. She's going over his history as a murderer and rapist, and he's basically just like sort of justifies it, but also is just like, yeah, it was pretty screwed up. These guys already know about that, and they already know how I feel about it, so there's kind of no point to this. And and then she tells Gru that Bonesaw is preparing to come after him again and to make it worse this time, which obviously Brian doesn't like to hear, but I don't think it like breaks him the way she intends it to.
No.
She tells Rachel that Taylor is going to betray her again, which actually just annoys Rachel.
Yeah, I think it does show the limitations of her power, that she can only read off emotions. She can't fully understand the people, and if she were able to fully understand them, she would know that this line of attack isn't going to really work. But this is really interesting because, like, Cherish plays into Gru and Rachel's own insecurities. For, like, we know Gru is, like, really traumatized and, like, constantly thinking about what Bonesaw did and, like, can't sleep, and Cherish plays into that. We know that Rachel is... one of the forefront things on her mind is her ability to trust Taylor and whether she can or not, so Cherish plays into that. But then Alec seems to be her trying to play off the other people by like sowing seeds of discord between them by revealing something about him. And that made me think that maybe that's not what she's doing. Maybe she's playing into Alec's insecurity too. Because, like, I really wonder if there was some part of Alec that was really actually seriously worried about what Cherish would say. He did write down a 225, and Alec, it's just Alec to play it off in his Alec-y way, to make it seem like it's not affecting him, or it makes me think that there's something more complicated and deeper going down underneath the surface on that one, because it would certainly line up that she's playing off each of their individual securities more. And that's just, that I think becomes clear the more I look at it and the more I think about it.
Yeah, that's true. It's like she's trying to get under Gru's skin. She's trying to get under Rachel's skin. It would be breaking the pattern if she wasn't specifically trying to get under Alec's skin here. And I guess maybe one interpretation, which we kind of have some evidence for from his POV, is that maybe this kind of stuff does bother him more than he lets on, because he's so consistently sarcastic about everything that you can't really judge based on his behavior whether he takes it seriously or not.
I think he just doesn't know how to, like, his emotions are really complicated because they're really muted, and he has no idea how to express them. And I think sarcasm is an easy way to get away with it. And I think the fact that he wrote down 225, and then as soon as confronted with the possibility that he'll be exposed for it, he admits to it and then plays it off as kind of a joke. I was just fucking with them. I think that's very interesting. But let's move on, because we'll talk about that for a while, but that's not really going to play into anything specifically in this arc, but just putting in the old brain. Yeah.
So her 2 minutes are up. So Cherish tells them about Siberian's body, which is apparently a middle-aged man, unkept, doesn't eat much, and right now Siberian, the projection of Siberian is chasing one of the candidates.
Yeah, and I don't know how much what Cherish is telling them is going to end up being totally true, but as soon as we learn that Siberian is like an old dude, a lot of his character kind of clicked into place for me, because like he projects as this beautiful, tall, naked woman, and it feels like the classic dude picks a female character in an MMO game thing. Like it feels like to me. And I was like, oh yeah, now he's kind of creepy on top of being a monster. So I mean, obviously this could go in a completely different direction, but that's the feel I got from him as soon as I learned this information.
Yeah, it's definitely being intentionally set up as like a creepy old man. And it's almost like a Wizard of Oz moment where the curtain is being pulled back on this, terrifying otherworldly thing that's so invulnerable that even the top heroes are afraid of her. And it's a creepy old murder hobo.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that this is here, though, because I was really worried about Siberian just being this invincible, unstoppable thing with no weakness. And this is a very good and understandable weakness. It's like a very good trade-off between amount of power with amount of vulnerability, and I like it.
Yeah. So at this point, since Taylor's mask is destroyed, she uses a scarf and a clustering of bugs to hide her face as they go out on their adventure.
Yeah, so this is never referenced again throughout the rest of the arc, but she's got that bug mask on through everything, right? Because we just move, like, from this point on, we're just going to move beat to beat with almost no stop. That's gross. Yeah. And, like, imagine what she looks like right now. Like, it's crazy. And again, it has to do with she doesn't even perceive this. She doesn't even, like, she's got to look creepy as shit right now. She has bugs crawling all over her face.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't know that her mask was destroyed, you'd be forced to conclude that, like, oh, she's really going off the deep end now. She's basically making bugs part of her costume permanently now.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to 14.2.
And that was a very long first chapter. But that was a very dense first chapter. I'm glad we spent the time on it we did, because it's setting up so many important things. And it was great.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you pointed out long ago that the first chapters always set things up, because there was a lot of important setup there. So Amy Dallin / Panacea is running from Siberian, who keeps catching her and biting off a tip of her finger and then letting her go, and then catching her and biting off another tip of her finger and letting her go. Our characters watch, not intervening yet, because they can't really do anything against the unstoppable force that just plunges through walls without resistance.
Yeah, this is really gross. And it's kind of even more gross now that we know Siberian is just a projection, and she's not like I don't know why. Maybe it's just me being weird, but like if she was at least getting nourishment from the people she was eating, maybe it's slightly less weird, but like she's not doing it for any tangible reason. It's just literally to be disturbing and gross. Yeah, and awful.
It's this pure, like, pointless indulgence, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So once again, Skitter thinks about how somebody, Panacea this time, isn't using her power to the fullest, and how Skitter could do it way better.
Yeah, this is the second time in as many weeks that we've seen this, and I think it says something about Taylor. Like a while back, like I made that big prediction that I think the power was some kind of parasite, and because parasites are bug-like, Taylor would eventually learn to control it, and by extension, control other people. I'm going to go ahead and say right now that that's wrong. Whatever this passenger is, it's not what I was thinking when I made that prediction. And with the number of, like, people able to control other people powers currently in play now, I feel like that on its own would be not a great addition. So instead I read this as, like, Taylor's, like, growing confidence and how that might be leading to a bit of a superiority complex. Her powers make her think better and faster than most people out there, and she's starting to get a little annoyed that everyone else isn't like that. I called her the queen bee, like, 10 arcs ago now or something, because in any crisis situation she seems to just, like, take charge and issue commands and control the battlefield through her power. And I'm even more convinced now that that's going to be her role going forward, that she's not going to literally control people's powers, but she's, like, the best micromanager ever. And so that's kind of what I read this as, is like her growing frustration with people not using their powers correctly, and her need to take over and issue commands to them instead of letting them just do it themselves.
Yeah, so I think that definitely is an important character beat, showing Taylor's, like you said, kind of growing sense of superiority and all that. But also I think that there's some legitimacy to her observation here that Panacea, indeed as a character, is not using her power to the fullest, because she has to be basically pushed and cajoled into doing the helpful things she does later in the chapter. Sure. And as far as we know, she's never done anything like that. Like, as far as she thinks of her power as healing, and her power is, like, practically limitless in terms of like what she can make with biology, but she just doesn't explore that at all, and that's completely contrary to how Taylor approaches her power, and that's interesting too.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't say that Taylor is, like, I don't want people to jump on me when I say she has a superiority complex or anything. I fully agree that Amy is not using her power to its fullest potential. And I think Taylor even says, she's not a warrior. She's never had to think in these life or death situations like this. So yeah, that's very accurate. Yep.
Yeah. So Skitter tries to use her bugs to provide cover for Amy using decoy swarm clones. And at first, Amy thinks Skitter is attacking her, but eventually clues in. And in the meantime, Skitter is using her power to search for Siberian's real body.
Yeah, there's a moment here with she's trying to direct Amy and look for Siberian at the same time, and Tattletale just asks her, "Are you still looking for the real Siberian?" And she snaps at her. Mm-hmm. I was very surprised by that just how angry Taylor is in this moment. She says, "I kept my mouth shut. Pointless to waste my breath or dedicate any focus for arguing when I could be trying to deal with Siberian." And it's to me, it was just Tattletale being give me an update. How's it going?
Right.
And she loses it. And this is very surprising. I think she's just really stressed, and she's frustrated by how she starts off frustrated by how Amy isn't using her power, right? And then she's frustrated that Amy is resisting her, and she's everyone just let me do me, let me do it. And I guess that puts her to a point of anger, but it was just very surprising to me.
For me, this reinforced this idea that I have, for a couple arcs now, that she kind of treats Tattletale like crap and takes her for granted.
Yeah.
And because it's she didn't deserve that. But yeah. So Siberian pulverizes most of Skitter's swarms with thrown trucks, and Trickster starts teleporting in grenades to Siberian's location to add to the distraction. And then Skitter eventually finds some men in the area and attacks them with bugs. But Siberian doesn't react to this, so she figures that none of those guys are the Siberian projector.
You think of these poor guys that are just hanging out in their house, and suddenly,
oh my god,
what is happening?
Yeah, I wonder why people don't like Skitter. Gru generates a ton of darkness, using it to try to connect with the Siberian body, basically just feeling around with it. And Skitter's using her bugs to steer Amy through this darkness. And then eventually Siberian uses her arm to casually cut a building down and topple it on top of Amy, and then starts chasing our villain group. And it occurs to Skitter that the creator is probably in a vehicle in order to sort of follow around this really fast-moving projection.
Yeah, and I don't really know how much else, what else to say about this chapter. There's a lot of cool action in here. We get our first moment of Prey, the arc title, where Siberian hunts Amy while the Undersiders are hunting Siberian. We see Taylor's communication with her bugs has gone to new levels again. She's doing the finger pointing thing. She's drawing diagrams and pictograms on walls, moving pictograms to get people to act. It's just doing a lot of really cool stuff. And again, it's like Wildbow, the stuff he comes up with this power, it's almost limitless. If you would ask me what you can do with a bug controlling power 14 arcs ago, I would have not said anything like this. And it keeps the action scenes interesting, and they flow well because you're constantly discovering how Taylor does new things. It's really cool.
Totally. Yeah.
And there's Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that is a really fun element of the story that just is consistently fun arc after arc, because there's always something new.
Yeah, there's a real threat of action getting stale, especially in a story this long, when you have one person as the point of view and you're constantly seeing them with the same power, but it just doesn't happen here because she's always using it differently.
Right, and it's not like she has laser blast and her laser blasts are getting stronger arc after arc. It's always a new and creative thing. Yeah.
There is one thing I wanted to touch on this chapter. It's kind of tangentially related. We've seen already in chapter 14:1 and here again where Taylor mentions that she doesn't know what she's going to do with Gru, that just asking him if he's okay or asking him questions about something would remind him of his trauma. This is a very common human sentiment to do to someone with trauma. if someone loses a parent or loses their spouse or something really bad happens to them, it's like, I don't want to bring that thing up because it'll remind them that it happened. And the more I learn about people, the more I see that this is actually a really ridiculous thing to think. Because, like, to assume that a person who just lost a parent or lost a spouse or went through a terrible breakup or something, like, isn't already consciously aware of that thing at all times is kind of ridiculous. Like, oh yeah, you brought it up, so you're going to remind me that my wife died or something? Like, that's not going to happen. So, like, it's just this very, I like this moment a lot because it's very real. It's how people handle people with trauma, and it's really wrongheaded. And I'm not blaming Taylor for it because everyone does it. Like, I've done it. But it's just this crazy thing. Like, the person with trauma needs you to talk to them and, like, to reach out to them. They want you to do it. And they can't articulate that, but you're not going to remind them that they just went through a trauma. Trust me when I say they're thinking of this all the time on some level.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed this out, because this is something that I've only, like, understood recently as a grown up. It's interesting, even the examples you're pointing out, because I was listening to this podcast, and on the podcast was this woman who had recently lost her husband, and she said literally exactly what you're saying, that, like, people don't want to talk about it, and they think they're doing you a favor by not reminding you. And it's like every moment she's conscious of this loss and would really just love some like acknowledgement of it, but everyone wants to be like, oh well, she seems fine right now, I wouldn't want to remind her of this, exactly what you're saying. So yeah. We're definitely not holding it against Taylor in any specific
no.
Taylor sense. It's just a very believable reaction to someone who's gone through trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the only thing I wanted to bring attention to on it. Yeah, it's not Taylor's fault. It's just very interesting, and I see this over and over again in real life, how people handle trauma like this, and it's wrong-headed. Don't do it. Mm-hmm. Talk to the person. They want you to talk to them. Anytime I've gone through something really bad, I've wanted people to talk to me about it, and people don't, because it's awkward and it's hard.
Mm. Yeah, so that's our PSA.
Yeah, the more you know.
Yeah. Yeah, so Tattletale tries to talk to Siberian and tells her for some reason that they're wasting her time on purpose, so that the other fork of the team can go after the other Slaughterhouse 9, and then Siberian just promptly just disappears.
Yeah, I thought about this for a while, because my gut reaction why would Siberian care? They can take care of themselves. And then I remembered this whole Bonesaw connection and the motherly love towards her, which is kind of weird now that we know she's actually a dude. But Siberian's reaction still makes sense here. But what were the Undersiders trying to do here? Because Wildbow structures the other attack as kind of a reveal of sorts. We didn't know what the plan for their team was. We just kind of offhandedly noticed that the entire team wasn't here. They're just fighting them again with less people. What was their plan to take down Crawler? Like, what was their plan to avoid Jack just murdering them all? Like, it never really reveals itself to me. And maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Maybe it just literally distract while we kill Siberian and then pull out. I don't know.
Yeah, I think various aspects of things didn't go the way they intended, maybe. Like, for one thing, Jack and Bonesaw aren't showing their faces at the other location. And those are really the only two of the 9 that are, like, vulnerable to the sorts of attacks that the combined Travelers Undersiders can put out.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I guess they succeeded in saving Panacea here, so that was a success.
Yeah, absolutely. I just don't like. I know Tattletale's plan there was that Siberian was probably gonna just run back or something. I don't know. She fucked up big. I don't, and it's hard to see what the line of thought was.
Yeah, she may have also been trying to. I mean, and I don't know if she was trying to do this or not, but they do basically, as a consequence of this, find where Siberian's real body is because Taylor finds the van driving haphazardly through the streets or the truck or whatever it is. True. So yeah, it's again, it's hard to know what was like part of the plan and what was kind of an opportunity that arose. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe as we go through this, we'll piece some things together.
Sure.
So 14.3 opens up, and Trickster is pissed at Tattletale because he feels that she's put Ballistic's life in danger because Ballistic is with the other group.
Yeah, and I think this is, we touched on this just a second ago, but we're so used to seeing Tattletale's power help her and help everyone in just about every situation that we kind of forget sometimes that it has limitations, and she's just making like really super educated guesses, and she's right a lot, but she can still be really wrong, and we see her be wrong at like one of the worst possible times, and now everyone's in danger. And I think that's a good reminder.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting how Tattletale reacts to Trickster here, because she actually seems like to remain wary of him throughout the rest of this section. Like a lot of the time we like see her shrug off people being mad at her. This is not one of those times, and I think it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure why, but she like consistently kind of avoids him and looks at him askance for the rest of the chapter.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
So Tattletale tries to engage Amy in conversation, but Amy's really freaked out because someone's biting her fingers off, and also hates the hell out of Lisa specifically. So Lisa gives up, and Taylor takes a stab at it. She starts doing first aid on Amy while talking to her, and Amy is kind of uncorking about how everything bad in her life started snowballing to hell right after the bank robbery.
And Matt, what does Taylor think in response to that information?
Me too.
Yeah. She that's immediate, and she doesn't say it out loud, but she admits that that's where things started to go bad for her too. And this entire conversation is so great, and it really cements to me a lot about how Amy is supposed to reflect some of the conflict going on in Taylor. And I'm going to remind everyone of this like 20 times throughout the arc, because I think it's very important. But we do see how alike Taylor and Amy are in this conversation, and how they process trauma, how they deal with their own insecurities, and how they rationalize and compartmentalize as they're going through stuff. Lash out when they perceive someone as bullies or bad guys in Amy's case, and how they kind of sometimes blame other people for their issues. And I want us to pay really close attention to this as we go, and I'm going to make sure we do, because it's really important how what happens to Amy reflects back on Taylor's struggle.
Yeah, just to draw out a specific example of what you're talking about, she's giving Taylor a hard time for being friends with Lisa, because she just hates Lisa so much. And she says, and you can be friends with her and you still think of yourself as a good person? And Taylor says, I don't know that I think of myself that way. I've probably done more damage than good by trying to help others. And then thinks, Dinah, the people in my territory, now Brian. And then Amy, but your intentions were good then. You were trying to help. And Taylor says, yeah. So, I mean, in context of everything we've been talking about so far, this is important.
It's so important. And we've talked over and over again about this idea that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That doing bad stuff for the right reasons, quote unquote, still results in a lot of bad stuff. And Worm is pushing that envelope and testing what its characters, and by extension us, are willing to put up with for the greater good. And we see here, when confronted with Amy, a person that Taylor, admittedly, she even says this a bit later, reminds herself of, we see kind of a sort of self-awareness that is unusual for Taylor, that she's done more bad things than good in her efforts to help people. And this is Taylor realizing that sometimes her actions have been questionable, and this is Taylor confirming one of the central themes of the story. And this is where I am absolutely convinced, and my being hard on Taylor is justified and correct for what the story is doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's Taylor. Taylor is being hard on herself here, maybe, but she's not wrong to do so. She's being she's examining herself in a very healthy way.
Yeah. And I want to make it clear that Taylor has done a lot of good things. I'm not saying that she hasn't. She's done a lot of really heroic things. We saw very heroic chapters from her just a few weeks ago. But yeah, there's still an undercurrent of justifying behavior in order to achieve these goals. And to Amy, who again, very similar to Taylor. Let's keep beating that drum so we don't forget it. It's not the end result that matters to Amy. It's the intentions. So that hearing that Taylor meant well is enough to get Amy on board. And she makes this decision because Taylor is able to make these kind of choices. So she trusts that she can help her through her own difficult decision. And the end result of that, well, we'll see, won't we?
Yeah. So, as you said, she does convince Panacea to help them, first by helping to boost the duration of the transformation of the dogs that they're riding so that they can continue to chase Siberian on the dogs. But Amy still refuses to go with them. So Skitter tells her that she's going to send a mass of bugs to her and tells her to just get creative with them. And Amy's consistently like, I don't know what you mean. And Skitter has to be like, just figure something out, which I think highlights again that Amy does not kind of own her power the same way Taylor does.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been more excited than this moment when I'm curious how exactly Amy is going to get creative with some bugs.
Yeah.
Obviously, the end result is the most amazing thing ever, but I was like on the edge of my seat here.
Yeah. So another moment. I mean, I think this is a really important conversation, so I'm pulling out more than usual of it. But Amy says, "You're a villain, you know. You're asking me to betray the family I grew up with if I'm helping you." I stared at her. We were so similar in such different ways, but I couldn't even begin to comprehend her train of thought. Why were the people who clung so fiercely to the notions of right and wrong the very same individuals who had the worst grasp of what they meant? Maybe I wasn't one to talk.
Oh, man. So before we jump into all the narrative implications of this, I wanted to touch on that phrase, we were so similar in such different ways, because I love it. It's such beautiful writing. Like, I go back and forth on whether I like Wildbow's narration or his dialogue more. And at times I really love the dialogue, and at times I really love the narration. And that's where I am right now. This is so simple, efficient. In like one sentence, you understand Taylor, you kind of understand Amy, you understand how their relationship is similar but also different. And it's perfect. I love it so much.
Yeah, and she has her own driving motives that she's essentially trying to justify, which is something that's like Taylor, and she has her own very narrow sort of sense of right and wrong that she's trying to act according to, but her sense of right and wrong is apparently like completely inscrutable to Taylor, just like I'm sure Taylor's sense of right and wrong is consistently frustrating and inscrutable to her teammates. So that's another similarity I think that's being drawn out here. Right,
because it constantly shifts. Like Taylor's right and wrong shifts depending on what the situation calls for. And like she seems on some level at least aware of that. I don't know if she's aware enough to change her actions because of it, but I do like that this awareness comes about whenever she is talking to other people. I think that's a good touch, that it's interacting with other people that allows these compartments that she creates to kind of come down a little bit. And I think that's important to Taylor and how much she needs human connection, and the further away from people she is, like the worse she gets.
Yeah. And every time she has one of these conversations with someone, I feel like it prompts a little bit of growth and self-realization, but I don't ever think it prompts an unrealistic amount of growth and self-realization, because really in my own life, like it's not like I have, a sequence of highly important conversations which completely transform me as a character and progress me through my arc. That's not exactly how things work. So I think it's good that she's sort of being given a bunch of lenses with which to see herself, which is other people. And sometimes it pushes her along, sometimes it kind of doesn't, and that's realistic.
Yep, I absolutely agree.
Yeah. At this point, Tattletale can't help but jump in because she knows what Panacea did to Victoria. And Panacea is afraid that she's a monster, and that's kind of what's happening here. This is kind of the struggle she's in right now. And Tattletale says, she's saying, "You're not a monster, not yet. You shouldn't hate yourself for what you did in a moment of desperation. Hate yourself for what you do after. Hate yourself for your cowardice, your refusal to step up and help at this moment right now, your refusal to participate in this world that you never even tried to understand. That's a conscious call you're making, and you know it's the wrong one."
Yeah, I really love this sentiment. I love the idea that we all make mistakes and screw up, but it's what you do after those mistakes that really defines who you are. And again, we're going to connect this back to Taylor. We do see moments where Taylor has realized that she's made mistakes and she's tried to correct it and step up. We've also seen moments where Taylor doubled down on that mistake in an effort for the greater good, taking a mistake and making it worse. Amy is going to choose to help out here. She's going to choose to try to be better, but then she's also going to make another choice in a few chapters that, we'll get there.
Yeah. So Tattletale's prompting is enough to get Amy to ride along, and as they're riding, Amy makes some relay bugs, which are basically modifications of, I think, maybe dragonflies, which serve to boost Skitter's range.
Yeah, my brain went crazy with the possibility of these two like being partners and doing all this crazy stuff. Sadly, we'll never get to see that world. And I think it probably makes sense from a story perspective that we couldn't see that, because that seems just so powerful. Like the ability to create new bugs for her to control seems like crazy powerful. So, but the relay bugs are really cool. I like them a lot.
Yeah, and obviously we see Taylor put them to good use pretty quickly, because it allows her to find the Siberian projector with her bugs. He's driving wildly downtown in a small, like, moving van type thing. And she basically tries to kill him as soon as she finds him. Siberian appears on top of the van and uses her power to basically extend her invulnerability to it to protect it. And Skitter, while they're chasing, is pelting the truck with grenades, which doesn't really do anything other than forces Siberian to stay with the truck, because if she leaves it, then it'll get blown up. Yeah,
I really like that you brought out where she basically like decides that she's gonna have to kill the guy like almost immediately. And I think this is important, because this is kind of what the 9 do, because like a few arcs ago she was like, would I be able to kill Jack? Like, could I do this? And she decided that she couldn't. But the 9 have kind of taken that from her, and now she's at this level of desperation where she seems completely willing to kill now. And I think we'll see this again before this section is through. But I think that's a very important change, and that, again, the 9 make you like them by putting you in these situations.
Yeah, and changes the scope of what you're willing to accept, I think. Yeah. So this is just a really awesome, intense chase scene with everyone using their powers to try to hamper the driver while chasing and avoiding the obstacles created by their own powers.
Yeah, I called this chase sequence one of the most exciting action sequences of the book so far for me. It's like the stakes are very clearly defined. You have a tense time limit. We have all of our characters trying to collectively use their powers to try to defeat this invincible monster. I think this is really, for me, second only to the Leviathan fight. I really, really enjoyed this. Yeah.
So they basically end this particular aspect of the chase when Sundancer uses her little sun to melt the entire road ahead of the truck, and the truck kind of disappears into the giant melted hole that was created. And at this point, the hero team shows up in their identical white bodysuits.
Yeah, this was really funny to me, because like they're wearing their identical suits and gas masks, and we heard in the Piggot chapter it's because so the Slaughterhouse 9 can't tell the local heroes from the heroes out of town, thus breaking the rules that the Slaughterhouse 9 set. But like Legend is shooting lasers out of his hands, and there's a giant fucking bear just hanging out. So like it's very obvious that these people aren't from Brockton Bay. Like I think it's really funny. I mean, to be fair, they weren't showing up at the fight expecting the 9. They just saw the big sun and came over. But it's just so funny to me that like it's very obvious that people from outside Brockton Bay are engaging in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, to speak of plans that are a little bit overly risky, it's kind of obvious that like unless the heroes were able to kill all of the 9 in one fell swoop, they were going to have their cover blown, and they would get the reprisal. I mean, and of course they don't succeed in killing all the 9 in one fell swoop. So
yeah, it's basically putting all your eggs in we're going to kill this. We're going to kill everyone with this bomb basket, and with no indication of the bomb would even work on some of them.
Yeah, which is really arrogant, because how many different groups of superheroes have tried to take out the Nine over the years and not succeeded? I mean, we don't know, but we assume it's high.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Jack was one of the founding members, right? Or one of the early members, at least. Yeah, he's still alive. So, yeah, I mean, the arrogance is astounding. You're absolutely right. And we'll get on that more when we get to the actual bomb dropping. But yeah, crazy risk-taking. Yeah.
So as they arrive, Skitter signals them with her bugs with letters saying Siberian and her creator are down there, basically. And Siberian emerges holding the truck overhead. Legend rains hellfire on her, and Cash tries to imprison her in his dimensional pocket, but the prison just kind of shatters without working on her. And then Siberian races away and is chased by Legend.
But Battery stays behind, the person who's supposed to ensure that Siberian escapes from this whole thing. So it's very interesting.
Very interesting. So here we have Chariot, our mole, Glory Girl, and Battery approach our villains. And Amy is not happy to be facing Glory Girl. She did not expect this. Chariot hands them a phone with a call from Piggot.
Yeah, and this is the first time we see Glory Girl after what Amy did to her, and it's really shocking. It's like circles under her eyes, like intense rage on her face. Like Taylor says, she almost doesn't even recognize her. The impact of what Amy did is here, and Amy and us must be forced to face it. And once again, let's remember that Taylor and Amy are very similar. So I'm just gonna keep beating that drum.
Please do. So moving to 14.4, Tattletale lets the heroes know that she has no need of the phone that Chariot is offering because she's already cracked their comm channel. And the strategic point of letting them know this is to let Piggot know that she's aware of the misinformation that she's been fed over time recently. Though I don't know exactly what the strategic point of letting the enemy know that you're aware of their misinformation would be.
I guess if they know, and then they know that they know, then everyone's just wasting time. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
But Lisa can also get the new codes really easily if they change. Mm-hmm. So I think my guess here is that by Lisa's power works on getting new information. So by putting other information out there, she's maybe hoping that it leads to a train of thought that infers some new information for her. That's my guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess what I was driving at is this a clever chess move by Lisa, or can she just not help herself in terms of screwing with people and lording things over people? Maybe a little of both. Yeah, maybe a little both. That's a good point. Probably so. Yeah, so I love the repartee between these two characters, Piggot and Tattletale. So here Tattletale tells her about Siberian's nature and infers that Piggot has something planned.
Yeah, there's a lot of sarcastic doublespeak going on between these two characters. But what really strikes me is just how fucking smarmy Piggot comes off. A week ago, we were in her head in a chapter, and I still didn't really like her, but I did kind of understand her. And now we're in someone else's head, and her she's just so cocksure and confident, and it just it drives me insane. And I think again that goes to how much point of view affects things. In that I just really hate her in this moment.
Yeah, I love when Piggot is do you think I'm stupid, Tattletale? And Tattletale says, stupid? No. Genius? No.
Sick burn, Tattletale.
Yeah. Well, and I like that Piggot laughs at this because she's like, oh, you got me. And that actually kind of makes me like Piggot. It makes me see her as human because it's relatable.
She's playing in a world of gods, and it's just a man. So it's it's being free to admit your faults is human.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So Piggot admits her plan to firebomb the Nine while actually still withholding the rest of the plan. So she's sort of lying by omission here.
Yeah, and I love this moment where she tells him that is well, our people are fighting them there, and Piggot is Legend did warn them that they shouldn't. He was told, I quote, suck shit. And Taylor's that would be bitch, or maybe imp, probably bitch. I love that moment. It's so great.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah, it's funny how I don't think I even realized until we're talking about it just now how comedic that whole exchange was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Piggot has cut off communications to the area that's going to be bombed, so the team will have to go into the danger zone to rescue their teammates. Tattletale probably rightly guesses that Piggot won't lose any sleep if Undersiders die in this event.
Yeah, and then Piggot says, "How sad that you see monsters where none exist." And this is like, this bitch. Like, I got so mad at this. Like, you can imagine how she says it too. But I think the important thematic part of all this is that you don't have to be a monster to do a monstrous thing. And I think, like, from Pigot's perspective, her goal here is noble. Defeat the Nine, possibly get rid of other bad guys in the area at the same time. These bad guys are threatening the people of her city's safety. So she's just doing her job. But also, what she's doing is wrong. It's risky. It's crazy. And on some level, I think she knows it, but she, like Taylor, is justifying it. Just like you justify putting a bullet to the head of a captured prisoner. Just like you justify leaving someone to die. Most people who do bad things like this don't see themselves as bad people. And the Nine, of course, are an exception to all this. And it's their just very existence that causes this dramatic shift in the status quo. And it is the existence of a monster that forces monstrous actions upon others. And I think this really like nails the theme of what the Slaughterhouse Nine are. Because the true horror of the Slaughterhouse Nine are not the things that they do, but rather the things that they force us to do to defeat them. And dropping bombs on your own city is one of those things.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention the obvious parallel to what Armsmaster did when fighting Leviathan. It's
right.
In his own justification, he's not like, yeah, my plan was to kill these villains. He's more like, my plan was to get Leviathan in a compromised position, and if a few villains had to be the ones who were sacrificed in the course of doing that, then I was going to pick villains over heroes. And that's essentially almost exactly the same thing Piggot is doing here.
Yep.
And justifying it in similar but different terms. Yeah. So the call ends and they head out again. Amy asks to be dropped off again because she didn't sign on for riding into a firebomb zone. Skitter asks her to make something specifying that they need firepower and mobility. And then she feeds Amy a large volume of bugs this time. So she's using the relay bugs to extend her range forward to the other group so she can see what they're doing.
Let it be known that as soon as I saw she asked for mobility, my brain immediately went to a giant flying bug that Taylor could ride around on, and I've never been more excited for what's about to happen.
Yep. So she's able to watch the battle with Crawler ahead of them while they're riding. It's cool to finally see Ballistic go all out here. He's basically just like shooting cars and just giant, things at Crawler at supersonic speed. Genesis is flying around and dropping stuff on him. Regent is piloting Shatterbird to just hamper him at every turn with a rain of glass. And she communicates with Regent by spelling out evacuate and basically giving him an alphabet to pick letters from to reply, which I loved. And he says they can't run because they're keeping Crawler pinned.
Yeah, this is so amazing. She just comes up with the shit on the fly. Like, I'll just make an alphabet board so you can talk to me. And it's like, again, like the ingenuity with some of this stuff is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Skitter also communicates the locations and rough distances of the Nine to the reassembled Hero Task Force, and they head off to go after Jack and Bonesaw. So finally, our villain team arrives at where Crawler is, and she starts using her million spiders to start weaving cords to ultimately hinder Crawler, and Gru blinds him with darkness, and Sundancer uses her sun to topple a building on him.
Yeah, and this is the most powerful we've ever seen Taylor. She's controlling millions of bugs, millions of individual instructions. She's doing it all with her brain. She doesn't get tired. It doesn't drain her. She just, we haven't seen her limit. Like, we haven't seen it yet. It just, it keeps going up, and it's incredible. And her plan kind of works. She manages to wrap Crawler up, which is cool.
Yeah. So everyone tries to flee, but Crawler chases and ends up knocking Genesis out of the air, who's carrying Imp and Ballistic. So they fall and they're kind of hurt. Skitter pulls a Taylor and gives up her seat to Ballistic, and then she continues running on foot, which is obviously not optimal and not really having a plan.
Yeah, I love this. I love that she just yells Gru's name and he like knows immediately what she's gonna do, and it's like, don't you fucking dare. Taylor, like, she can be so heroic at times, and that's what, like, maybe we just haven't done a good job of stressing like how much of a hero she can be, and why I point out when she's not living up to her potential, because this is the noble heroic sacrifice for other people for no other reason than she puts them first.
Yeah, she's very willing to sacrifice herself for other people. The problems arise when the option to sacrifice herself isn't available, but the option to sacrifice other things is available.
Yep, absolutely.
So, yeah. She senses the heroes being put in a dimensional pocket by Cash as they're fighting, which basically signals her that things are about to go down. Amy finishes her creation, which we don't really know what it is yet because Skitter can't really perceive what it is, but she brings it to herself, and Scott, it's a giant flying beetle.
Matt, I lost my shit. I was going crazy. I know we're in the middle of this really tense battle, and we have this big threat of 2 looming explosions over us, but Taylor's riding on a giant fucking flying beetle, and it's the most amazing thing ever.
Yeah. I mean, it's so satisfying. It's so satisfying. So it ends up being that this new bug is very hard for her to fly. It's not instinctive like her other bugs, where she can just sort of give it a vague command. She has to micromanage its every movement, but she does figure it out. So soon she's in the air, laughing giddily to herself while buzzing her friends with a salute, which I have to imagine what they're thinking at this moment.
Yeah. I can't. It's going to be so incredible. This is awesome.
Yeah. So 14.5, high above the city. She's flying. She can't even sense any of the bugs below her anymore because they're out of her range. And she sees the bomber fly in and incinerate several blocks of Brockton Bay. Tattletale calls, and they decide that Jack and Bonesaw may have survived by going underground.
Yeah, so we see that the first bomb is completely ineffective at all. But we know there's a second bomb, and this is Hitchcockian suspense creating, right? Like, knowing the bomb is under the table about to go off is way more suspenseful than just being surprised by it. And so now everything that happens over the next 2 chapters have this undercurrent of tension, because we know that the second bomb's coming. We know that they don't know that the second bomb's coming. So you're like, oh my god. It's really great.
Yeah, it's interesting here to think about the plan here, because like you pointed out, the firebomb is almost completely effective, except maybe as a strategy to drive certain members of the Nine into certain places where they're maybe more susceptible to the second bombing run. I'm not really,
yeah, maybe.
I'm not really sure. Yeah,
it's such a risky plan too, because there's like all their people are there, and like I mean, we find out that they use Clockblocker's power to basically freeze people in place to protect them, but that power doesn't have a set end time.
Right.
like it doesn't, like, you never know when it's going to end. It could be as short as 30 seconds. What if the fire hadn't gone away, Matt? Like, it's just like,
right.
It's so risky.
Yeah. Also, I continually can't stop myself from thinking about the fact that while Cash is time locked, Cash can't perceive anything. But Clockblocker can't freeze himself with his power. He can only freeze his costume. So he's basically sitting rigid in a shell of his own costume as this firebomb explodes all around him. Presumably he can see out of his own mask as this happens. And he's just sort of watching, and then he's watching Crawler spit acid on him in a moment, just waiting for the invulnerability of his suit to wear off. It's always fun to think in detail about what's actually happening in terms of powers, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So as she's flying around, she comes down and she sees Weld fighting Mannequin in the flamescape below. Mannequin is trying to pile cars on top of the clock-blocked heroes so that when they come out of stasis, they'll be crushed.
Yeah, I really want to point out how much I like Weld. I really, really like him. He's insanely cool. And I think it's really interesting to watch how different his fight with Mannequin is than Taylor's, because it's a completely different power set, and it just kind of shows how adaptable Mannequin is, and how much of a threat he can adjust his situation to fight just about anyone. And even Weld, who's a person who he really can't hurt Weld in any kind of serious sense, but he can still hamper him enough to threaten him, and I think it's just really cool.
Yeah. I like the little digression on like the differences and similarities between their powers. So yeah, Skitter flies to her friends and asks Amy for help with the beetle in terms of controlling it, which Amy largely refuses. And Ballistic hands her some grenades, and Trickster gives her a gun.
Yeah, I was at first kind of surprised by Amy's choice here. It makes sense in retrospect, but I think I started seeing her as like on Team Undersiders, so I was like, oh wait, you're not gonna help, but she still does help out slightly, which I think is interesting, but she's not fully ready to commit to helping out this person who she still perceives as a bad guy.
Yeah, she's really vacillating on this, and I think that's credible.
Yeah.
So she flies back and she uses a grenade to blast a car off of Cash. She tries to support Weld by tossing a grenade at Mannequin, but Weld doesn't understand what she's trying to signal, and so he almost gets blowed up.
Yeah, I laughed out loud when I read this. I think maybe it was just like the sustained tension over so much time that I just needed a release of some sort. But this was really comedic for me, especially since like right before she drops the grenades, she says, I really shouldn't be using these things without any sort of training. And then she just uses them anyway. And almost blows someone up. And then like there's the moment where she drops the first one to clear the cars off of the clock blocked heroes, and it's like, man, it's lucky that they didn't come out of stasis right when the grenade went off. It's like, holy shit. Like,
yeah. Right. I love the acknowledgement of this, because like if anyone were to just hand me a grenade and be like, yeah, just just do that, I would be like, there's like a 50% chance that I'm going to be dead here because I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, so Cash, so first Crawler comes in and he's fighting Weld. Crawler's obviously a lot bigger and stronger than Weld, so he does some damage to Weld. And then he sprays his horrifying solvent that we're about to find out about all over the time-locked heroes. Cash comes back from time stoppage and is covered in this solvent, but keeps his composure and manages to pull the heroes out of his dimension. Skitter shoots Mannequin in the back successfully. I also love the moment where she's like, whoa, how did I do that?
Yeah.
It's hard. The handguns are hard to fire. I don't know if this is widely understood, but it's hard. It's
kind of the Saving Private Ryan moment too, where she shoots him and he falls over and she's like, wow, I did it. And then he just gets back up and you're like, oh.
Yeah, that's true. So Glory Girl takes on Crawler, which at first seems like it might be a good match, but then he sprays her with his solvent and then he hits her. So her force field goes down, thus causing the solvent to go onto her skin, and then her flesh begins to melt off horrifyingly.
Oh, this is tough to read. First of all, I think it was surprising that Crawler just knew how Glory Girl's power worked.
Yeah, I had the same thought, and then it occurred to me that that might have just been an accident. Like he just might have been like, well, I'll just spray this person and hit them because that's a good thing to do. I mean, it may have been a lucky accident on his part, but
that's fair. Or it could be Cherish telling them stuff about people, but it doesn't matter. The point is that this is really tough to see, and I think it's here where I realized what we had been setting up with Amy and the choice she's going to be presented with, and I was like, oh no, this is where we're going. Oh god.
Yeah. So we move into 14.6. Vista is keeping Crawler pretty much in place by manipulating the street dimensions around him, and Flechette shoots him with her flechettes, which damages him, but they're kind of too small to really do much. There's just lots of cool fighting in general.
Yeah, this is another one of those parts where like it's tough to single out and talk in detail about all the fighting that's going on. It's all cool. I like it all. Let's just move on.
Yeah. So Weld throws Glory Girl up to Taylor, and Taylor catches her in the air, seeing Dragon Genesis waiting in below as she flies away. And as she's flying back to Panacea, she names her beetle Atlas.
Yeah, I love this so much. It makes sense in story because it's a Hercules beetle, so Hercules Atlas, it makes sense for her, but it works so thematically too. Atlas is responsible for holding up the sky, forever burdened with the task of keeping the sky from literally falling. Who does that remind you of?
I don't know. I don't know what you're getting at there. So she brings Glory Girl to the other Undersiders and tells Amy to heal her. And of course, at this point, Victoria tries to refuse the healing, even though she's literally dying, because that's the place that she's in right now.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to like, I don't blame her. I don't blame her for this. Like, I would not, after what she did to her, I would not want Panacea touching me at all, even if it meant maybe dying. Like, who knows what else she's going to do to you.
Right. So here we have, as she's refusing, Amy shook her head, talking over her. She's always been emotional, passionate, unrestrained, and she's channeling all this new emotion into hate because it's the closest equivalent. New emotion, Regent asked. You mean you mind raped her? Which, so like we pointed out at the start of the chapter, we've been reminded of this aspect of Regent and his character and his history, I think specifically so that this punch lands, where the contrast and the reflection of Regent being the one to point this out hits home and hits us the right way and hits Amy the right way, and it's a well-crafted moment. Yeah. And again, I'm always glad that you point out that the first chapter sets things up, because obviously this was what was being set up there. This is where that shoe falls.
Yeah, and on top of being the most ironic thing ever stated by a human being in the history of Earth, it turns out it's also really important to what we're going to do with Amy in this chapter. We'll get into that in a minute, but it's very important to contrasting Amy and Alec and what their power does and what we're okay with and what we're not okay with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Tattletale uses her power of lying and tells Glory Girl she's going to rinse her with water, but then just pushes Panacea at her. So Panacea uses her power to try to heal Victoria and sees that Crawler's spit is basically like a mixture between protease and acid and nanotechnology, and it's really hard to deal with.
Yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on the decision of Tattletale here to ignore Glory Girl's request and basically let Amy heal her. Now I know it's going to go further than that in a minute, but I'm just talking about this. Like, should you honor the wishes of someone even if they seem seemingly irrational and will lead to their death? Like, what is Tattletale's duty to Glory Girl here? Like, or duty to saving a person? Like, I'm curious what your thought of that is.
I think here Tattletale is actually legitimately trying to help Amy first and foremost, because her priority is, she's basically saying, and as she's about to say, as she says right here, she's basically saying, heal, save her life and then fix what you did to her head. And it's very clear that Tattletale's like, just stabilize her and then fix what you did to her head. You need to fix what you did to her head as soon as possible, because this is the like monster slippery slope that you're going down, Amy Dallin. You need to rectify this mistake right now while you have the opportunity, and then then we can move forward. Then Victoria can move forward, and she can do what she's going to do, but at least then her mind will be intact and your ethics can be intact, because you've made the right choice and you've righted the wrong that you committed. This is the only opportunity you're going to get, though, because she's incapacitated right now. I mean, this is I'm putting all this in Tattletale's mouth, but it's she says pretty much just as much. She says it's as much a priority as anything else. I said it before. If you don't do it now, and Amy, of course, shuts her down because she's doesn't want to hear that, basically.
Yeah. I think that's a good read on it. I think you're absolutely right. She has a duty to keep her alive and to undo what was done to her. But after that, she will give Glory Girl back her agency and allow her to make her own decisions.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of dodged your question in terms of, is it okay to ignore what Glory Girl's asking for here? I mean, I think that comes down to personal opinion, maybe. I think that Glory Girl is like both mentally and physically compromised in this moment. So it probably is somewhat appropriate to just go ahead with the healing and then, bite the bullet afterward.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So she continues to fix her while the Undersiders banter about the fact that Taylor had offhandedly mentioned that she thought about feeding people bugs in a pinch.
Yeah, and Alec continues to be like super judgy here and makes me want to beat him over the head with the black kettle. This whole exchange is kind of weird to me, and I'm not sure I like it. Like, Alec calls Taylor out on wanting to feed bugs to people, and like, it's not like she was gonna force them down people's throats. It was just like, if we get desperate and run out of food, I can bring you bugs. Am I just reading this wrong? Am I missing something? Like, this whole exchange is really weird to me.
So my interpretation of this is that Taylor is actually just really sensitive and has no sense of humor.
Actually, that's very fair.
Because I think Alec is just messing with her. Like, he doesn't really care about the feeding bugs thing. He's just like, oh, that's kind of weird. It's kind of weird, bug girl. And he's just needling her, and instead of like rolling with it and biting back humorously or whatever, she's like, well, it seems like a good idea. I don't know why. And because we're in Taylor's head, we miss the fact that Alec is just doing what he would do to anyone about anything, which is just ribbing them and giving them a hard time about it. I mean, I think it's in other scenarios and other Wildbow stories, we have characters who banter back and forth. Taylor never banters back and forth. She always gets really sensitive when people give her a hard time. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right here. I think I was reading this not from Taylor's kind of unreliable narrator point of view, but now that I look at it from that perspective, it makes a lot more sense, and I like it more. Okay,
good. I'm glad I was able to save that for you. So at this point, Amy's basically saying, like, I'm not going to listen to you. You're a bad guy. And Tattletale says, oh yeah. Tattletale replied in a dry tone, I'm evil, right? Maybe that's all the more reason to listen if I'm saying that something's fucked up and wrong.
Yeah. Hey, Amy. This is Tattletale making a really good point. Maybe you should listen to her. And hey, this is the 47th reminder that we've been continually comparing Amy and Taylor throughout this whole arc, almost as if this is about to pay off in some kind of really important and meaningful way. Just a reminder.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so instead of listening to Tattletale and everyone else, Amy basically like hypnotizes Glory Girl with her power to make her docile and controllable, so she won't fight Amy as Amy tries to finish the healing.
And here it is, Matt, and I'm about to talk for a really long time, and I apologize, but this is the conceit of this week's episode, so I feel like I have to. This is the moment we've been building to this entire time. We've said it over and over again. Taylor and Amy are so much alike in a lot of ways. They both make choices thinking they're doing things for their greater good. They both ignore those around them when they're offering them advice, ignoring the feelings of those they care about because they think they know better. They're able to justify these monstrous actions as long as they're done to monsters or done to people they care about. And we see Amy make a choice here. It's a horrible choice, a wrong choice. It doubles down on the bad thing that she did the first time. It crosses a line. She can't come back from it. And let's make no mistake. Let's be very clear here. This is wrong, what she's doing. I don't think there's really a lot of wiggle room for interpretation in that. I think it's very clear textually that what she's doing is wrong here. And she thinks that it's the right thing to do. She justifies it. And then she attacks the hypocrisy of the Undersiders for calling her out on it being wrong. And Matt, she's kind of right on that front. Like, they are allowing Regent to freely use his power. Taylor specifically calls her out and says, hey, ends justify the means doesn't work. And that's like Taylor's, like, her job. That's like what she does. These people that she sees as hypocrites are calling her out for something, and she uses that for justification of why it's okay. And that doesn't really hold up, because like, just because a murderer says don't kill people doesn't mean that it's okay to kill people because they're being a hypocrite. And Amy can't see that, and Amy messes up here. And again, Amy and Taylor are so much alike. And this is what we're doing here. This is what Amy's story in this arc is doing. It's a word of warning for Taylor, that if you keep playing fast and loose with your morality, if you keep justifying, if you keep compartmentalizing and rationalizing, eventually you're going to cross a line that you cannot walk back from. And if I'm ever hard on Taylor, That's why, because Taylor is better than this. I fully think that. I think Taylor is stronger than this. I think Taylor is a hero. But that doesn't mean she couldn't make the same choice that Amy does. You know, what would Taylor be willing to do to save Dinah? What would she be willing to give up? And there's so many parallels here, and it's so important. It's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, it's absolutely, you know, critical that Taylor is being given this mirror essentially at this point in the story. And it's a great dramatic element to force her to confront certain things. And I don't know that she necessarily is confronting them in the moment, because she's doing things like justifying Regent's use of his power, which is something that she was highly uncomfortable with before.
Right. She basically says it's okay if it's a monster. And again, so she's putting Shadowstalker in the same category as Shadowbird, which while Shadowstalker is truly a terrible person, I don't think she's on the same level as a member of the Slaughterhouse 9. So yeah, you're absolutely right that my biggest concern here is that it is a mirror and we're seeing it as readers, but is Taylor, and maybe she is on some level, like Taylor has this ability to take stuff in and toss it in that compartment and then ignore it until later. So hopefully it's in there somewhere and she'll realize it down the road. But that is what we're doing with Amy in this moment. And I just wanted to make sure everyone's really clear on that she is a example of what could happen to Taylor if she continues doing what she's doing.
Right. Yeah. There's almost always a time delay between something happening to Taylor or her making a choice and then her kind of having time to sleep on it and internalize it and objectively view it outside of that situation. And that's very normal and human. So hopefully this sinks in on some level. But yeah, in the course of the conversation, Taylor chimes in to say that this thing that Amy's doing is a predictable bit of self-deception that Taylor herself is very familiar with. But Amy rejects this. And at this point, the other Undersiders, not including Taylor, because she wasn't with them when they were talking about it, tell her that they wanted to ask Panacea to join their team, actually, but she refuses fairly vehemently. Finally, Amy tells her that Atlas is going to starve to death soon because she didn't give him a digestive system, and then she leaves with Glory Girl, basically using Glory Girl's flight to fly away. Gru, as they're leaving, borrows Amy's power and uses it to give Atlas a digestive system, which he doesn't really know what he's doing because it's not really his power. So it's a human digestive system.
Yeah, that's a bit of a Cronenbergian horror moment, isn't it, Matt? I mean, it's like really weird. On the bright side, though, it means Atlas will really like tacos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the perfectly nutritious food. So at this point, they assess their options and they discuss strategy, and they decide to go after Jack and Bonesaw. So we slide into 14.7, which is the last chapter we're going to do this week. They head to the location that they're discussing, which is the probable hiding spot of Jack and Bonesaw, which is one of two different shelters, one of them being the Endbringer shelter where Scion confronted Leviathan. And here we reflect on something that I don't think Taylor has. I don't think we've necessarily seen before, but it's a very believable moment. Lisa is asking Taylor why that location is associated with bad memories, and Taylor says it's because there was someone who she didn't like in the bunker, and she says a teacher. I think that when I left the Undersiders, I guess I was thinking of considering becoming a hero or something. But with what happened at the shelter, I almost feel like it was a turning point. It was the first time I did anything that someone else could point to and call heroic, and somehow I can't find it in myself to be proud about it. And it's like the dream of being a hero that I always had just kind of faded away in the face of reality. Yeah,
Taylor.
It's just sad here, I think, because you know, she did do something really heroic, and she never, as usual, actually, she didn't really let herself feel good about it. And we're learning, I think, for the first time, basically, that she kind of internalized the fact that she didn't feel good about being heroic, and in some sense, use it to justify sliding in the opposite direction.
Yep.
Yeah. And then look, hey, in this scene, Taylor is volunteering to go on a dangerous solo mission to scout out one of the locations while the Undersiders check out the other. And Gru says no, but Taylor does anyway. That's weird.
Yeah, almost as if Taylor has like sort of a hero complex.
Hmm.
Like she's always striving for that moment she can feel proud of, even though that tragic part about Taylor is her trauma, her repressed trauma, and this emotional state of hers makes it almost impossible for her to give herself any credit for anything. Man, it's almost as if she's like some sort of, I don't know, Titan who's like got the entire world on her shoulders or something. Hey, on an unrelated note, isn't Atlas a cool name for her bug?
It is. Yeah, it is. I just like the sound of it.
Yeah.
No other reason.
No thematic reason at all.
No. So she doesn't find Jack and Bonesaw, but she does find Siberian and Legend dueling. Legend is obviously just trying to keep Siberian pinned in this general area, and obviously not gonna be able to do any damage to her. And Siberian's still carrying the truck around, but Taylor realizes after searching it that the creator is not in the truck.
Yeah, and then she like skywrites to Legend to let him know. And this made me laugh so much because now I was thinking of like people hiring Taylor to skywrite for them. Like, can you imagine, will you marry me in bugs in the sky?
Giant apocalyptic swarm of bugs.
My brain is fun.
Yeah, that's great. So she gets Legend to blast open the shelter nearby and find Bonesaw, Jack, and Siberian's creator within. She orders her bugs to basically eat them alive, unhesitatingly, while cocooning their arms and hands in silk. But nonetheless, Bonesaw manages to get her bug-killing smoke out, which starts killing the bugs. Taylor tries to ignite the smoke, but finds that it is not flammable.
Yeah, and again, to wrap up what we were talking about with her lack of hesitation with killing Siberian's creator while he was in the truck, we're seeing her go all out here. She's no longer caring about holding back or keeping people alive, and the 9 have pushed her to that point of desperation. From can I execute Jack? I don't know. The actual like saying it's easy to actually doing it's a lot harder. And now she's just like, fucking kill these people now. I have to.
Yeah.
And it's just like I'm not like, when we point out this stuff, people tend to say like, well, they're monsters. Like we have to do that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I'm just pointing out the fact that look where she's gone. Like look at point A and point B now, and look at that change, and that's important.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. It's not that this is a bad thing for her to be doing. It's that now she has crossed this line, and if we know one thing about Taylor, it's that once she crosses a line, that's her new normal.
Yep.
So Legend attacks the 9 that are huddled in the shelter, and then retreats as yet another bomber arrives. This one drops Bakuta's bombs on the area, and 3 blocks of Brockton Bay are turned into a realm of otherworldly chaos. Yeah.
So monsters where there are none, right, Piggot? Because there's no doubt in my mind that civilians were killed in this. I mean, obviously we know the ones in the vault were, I mean, and granted they were horrible mutations by Bonesaw, but they were still human beings. But they said they evacuated the area, but evacuations aren't perfect. I mean, I'm pretty sure people died in this, and they seem completely indifferent to that fact, because ends justify the means, right?
Right. I mean, even if it was just the hostages in the vault, it is very interesting how Legend is able to be like, yes, well, they were horribly disfigured. I don't even think they would have thanked us if we had saved them. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure they wouldn't have thanked you if you'd saved their lives.
Yeah, you get to make that call for them? That's interesting.
Right.
Okay.
That's odd coming from you, Legend. Interesting. So, yeah. So she talks to Legend up in the sky. He tells her that Mannequin was indeed pinned in place and is dead, and that Crawler actually stayed on purpose because Piggot had just tell him outright that this bombing run was coming in. So Crawler stayed in place to intentionally be hit by bombs and is now dead, which is just great. I wanted to point out here before I move on from this that I was actually really surprised that Mannequin dies off screen like this, and is basically just chalked up to, if anyone, clock blocker. Because I thought that we were going to get another showdown between him and Taylor was going to, defeat him soundly this time, and we didn't get that. And I don't feel like I don't feel robbed at all, actually. In fact, I feel like, oh yeah, I mean, this this story plays very well with tropes, and one of the ways that you play well with tropes is that you don't just give people what they expected.
Yeah, you subvert it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was agreeing with that, and when I originally made my prediction about Armsmaster coming back into the fray at the end, I thought he was going to assist Taylor in taking down Mannequin, which would be a cathartic moment for him. But yeah, that didn't happen. So that is a good point. It's interesting, and they definitely subverted my expectations here. So I think that this is really brilliant, because I think making the bomb work on some level kind of forces you to look at it, and like if it had been completely ineffective, like it just hadn't worked at all, it'd be much easier to say this was wrong. But like it killed Mannequin and Crawler, like one of the most powerful, indestructible people on the team. So like it forces us to deal with the ends justify the means. Like it forces us to look at that and say, well, did it? Like was this justified? And the problem is, of course, that if you justify bad actions for good reasons, every time you do it, you move that line. And the more you stretch your morals, like the bigger the consequence. And I think that's what we're going to see here, is that they did something that was risky, that maybe didn't work because they were desperate, and they said, well, this is justified if it works. And now they have to live in the consequences.
Yeah, much like their plan to capture Shatterbird resulted in losing Gru, this plan succeeded in taking out 2 more of the 9, but is now going to get a high level of blowback. Yeah. So they see below, they see Jack and Bonesaw and Siberian and her creator, and they're kind of huddled together. The man is injured, the projector, and Siberian is flickering violently. And I don't think we mentioned this on air, but we had learned that Siberian can't actually extend her invulnerability to her projector, although she can extend it to like a car that he's sitting in, obviously. And then we have this moment where Legend is looking down and kind of like sighs and says, "My eyes are better than most, a minor benefit of my powers. The backs of his hands, perhaps you can make out the tattoos, a cauldron on the left hand and a swan on the right."
So please remind me if I'm supposed to recognize the swan at this point. I don't think I am, but I'm bad at reading things.
I don't think you are.
Okay, yeah, because the cauldron is obviously cauldron, but okay. So I'm glad I didn't miss something there.
Yeah. Yeah, so as the hero and villain teams converge on the area, Legend reminds us that this is the worst case scenario because Bonesaw is going to deliver her bioweapon punishment now.
Oh, look, and there's the consequence. We took a risky action. It was the wrong thing to do. It was perfect example of ends justify the means, and then now we have to suffer the consequence of that. And I'm sure they will be proportionately worse than anything we could have imagined. I can't even, with how fucked up Bonesaw is, I can't even imagine what this is going to be. But there we are. So that's what happens. We've got 2 really good examples for what can happen when you keep playing fast and loose with your morals in this one arc. Almost as if that's one of the themes of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, and deeply rooted in the conflict and struggle of the characters, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Just thinking out loud here.
Well put.
Yeah. So, Scott, I think that was a good place for us to break this arc. Let's move on into your speculations.
All right. So first of all, we have 2 old ones that were confirmed. Like I said, the source of the powers being a parasite that Taylor will learn to control. I'm willing to call that wrong at this point. Even if something happens that's closer to that, it was very clearly what the passenger quote unquote is not what I was thinking of when I said this. So I'm going to allow myself to be wrong. It doesn't happen very often, but you know. And then Taylor will fly at some point. That was correct, because now she has a flying beetle named Atlas that's gonna live forever, I hope, because it's amazing. I think it's really cool, and I'm glad I was right with that. I don't think when I first said Taylor will fly, that's not quite what I imagined. I was thinking maybe she'll like make a suit out of bugs that lift her or something. I don't know. But that was really cool. I'm glad that happened.
Yeah, I think you get full credit for that one, because she's flying using bug powers, which is, distinct from flying because she's being carried by somebody or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's full credit.
Yeah. So my new ones, first, I'm going to say that Genesis is a cauldron vial cape thing. My line of thought here is that we know Siberian is, and Siberian has a power to project herself. And I think the text somehow connects dots for you on this one, in a very subtle way that I think they mention when they're thinking about Siberian's power that maybe it works like Genesis's, and I think that's an intentional connection to get you thinking, here's two powers that operate kind of similarly, and we know one of them is a cauldron cape, so maybe the other one is. So that's my reasoning behind that one, which doesn't really give me any more insight into what is going on with the Travelers, but there it is.
Okay.
And then my other one is that Amy's bad choice to hypnotize Glory Girl and work on her will backfire. Something's going to go wrong in this. I don't think she's going to fully bring Glory Girl back to normal. And the result of that is going to and allow Amy to be dead. She's going to die. That's my prediction there, because I think like we've seen her kind of come to the end of her arc, as it were, and she might play some role in the story before that, but I think she's very clearly crossed that line, and I don't think there's any coming back from it at this point. So she can be removed from the story at this point. So that's my prediction there.
Cool. All right. Very interesting. Okay, Scott. So that wraps up part 1 of Arc 14 Prey. I hope everyone enjoyed our discussion and hearing Scott's reactions. As always, we appreciate your feedback, and we're always trying to improve. So let us know if you have any advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's episode.
Yeah, you can reach out to us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is at scottdaly85, and Matt's is at moredinamail, and mine is spelled D-A-L-Y. Matt's is spelled away.
Oh, yeah, we got letters. If you're not already subscribed to We've Got Worm, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film, and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. I saw Transformers 5 last night, and I'm going to write a review on it because it's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
All right.
So look for that.
Hopefully a book-length essay.
Not quite.
So we also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. That's DALY. If you like what we do here and want to make sure we keep doing more of it, consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Also, while you're over at patreon.com, please make sure you stop by Wildo's page and toss some money there, because he's the guy that makes this whole thing possible.
Yeah, and as always, if you're one of those that can't spare any extra cash, we do completely understand, but there's still tons of ways to help us out. You can share the podcast with all the other communities you're available in. We're always trying to find new people that maybe like Worm or have never read Worm. So share this with them. It's a perfect time to get back into the world of Worm. And we would really appreciate it. Also, if you could take a moment to rate and review us on iTunes, we would really appreciate that too. Every week we read one of our wonderful reviews, and I'm starting to run out of them, Matt. So we need some new reviews, guys. We will read you. So this one is from Jeffrey B, who says, "These guys do an incredible job of going deep into one of my favorite stories of all time. If you have any interest in Worm or even incredibly good literary analysis, please listen to these guys and their incredible insights." And Matt, that's like 3 Incredibles in 2 sentences. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen this many Incredibles in one place since Disney Pixar's 2004 film. That was a joke, everyone. I'm really good at this. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and thanks to everyone else who has rated and reviewed us. Each and every review, like it really does help. Like I'm not kidding with this. Like the more reviews you have, the more exposure you get on iTunes, and the more people we can bring to this excellent book. So keep it up, please. Yeah, and it always feels really good for us to hear that kind of stuff. So next week, we're going to finish up the last few chapters of Arc 14, Prey. See you guys next time. I can't wait. I know. Bye-bye, everyone.